So now let's add on some more lights. I'm still focusing on this area. So you see we have these fluorescent light stands on either side of the assembly crane. Although the light fog that we've added in helps, we can really make those stand out by having them illuminate the scene. So what I'll do is I will add in a light to do just that. Light. And this time I'm going to try a point light. Now a point light illuminates in all directions. So what I'll do is I'll put a point light right here, sort of where the light would be most directly hitting the floor. And I might decrease the range a little bit, but increase the intensity. Now the reason why I would do this is because in deferred rendering, which is what I'm using for the floor and some of the larger assets, lights become more expensive depending on how many pixels they illuminate. So if I want this light to be brighter, I can increase the range, which you see makes it brighter, or I can increase the intensity. Now by decreasing the range, I am decreasing the number of pixels that are illuminated, which makes the light more efficient. So to compensate for the loss in brightness caused by that, I can increase the intensity. So maybe I'll increase the intensity a bit and the range a bit, and then I'm going to tint this one ever so slightly blue. Really subtle. And then I might just duplicate that one and put it over here in the back. And you can see in our scene view, that's already looking much more convincing now that we have actual illumination around these lights. Now let's set up our main light for this ship, because as you see, if I hit play and I look at it, I still can't quite see what's going on here. I need a main light, even though there's nothing in the scene that would realistically be casting it. So what I'm going to do is I will create another light, another spotlight this time, and this one I'm going to have it pointed up at the assembly crane. Or I could also maybe try tilting it down. Now if I disable it, you can see that it's illuminating the floor, and I'm not sure if I want that yet, because that is a lot of pixels that are being illuminated. So what I can do is I can use what's known as a culling mask, and that's right here. Now what the culling mask does is it lets you choose which objects these lights illuminate. They don't have to illuminate everything. So for example, here, if I select this ground plane, I can go to my layer, and I made a new layer just with add layer called large environment. And then what I can do is I can go to my light, and I can set the culling mask to not affect large environment. So now I can increase the range of this, or the brightness, significantly without blowing out the floor, or without illuminating it, because we don't necessarily need it to do that. Now if I bring back my window, actually let me hit play. And you can see that's very nicely illuminated, but we're not necessarily illuminating everything else. You may choose to do that, to have it illuminate the floor. I'm choosing not to for right now, just due to performance reasons. So now that we have that, let's focus on the rest of the environment here. So let's focus on these tanks. They've got these glowing blue tubes in them. So what I'll do is I'll put in some lights to help that affect the environment. So again, another light. Put that right here. Make the range on this very small. Increase the intensity, and we're making this one blue. Very good. Might duplicate that for this one. You see what's happening right there? You see how the light is changing depending on our viewing angle? That's because of something called pixel light density. So what's happening is that Unity can only calculate so many lights onto a surface at once. So there's a few ways around this. We can either change certain lights to not affect this floor plane. That's partially what we were doing with this spotlight. Or we could also go into Edit, Project Settings, Quality, and the pixel light count. The higher this is, the more lights you can have on a single surface, but the more expensive it becomes to render that surface. So if I change that to 7, then you'll see we get that light again. Alright guys, one small thing I changed, actually quite a big thing that I changed in between recordings and then forgot to talk about. So as I just mentioned about the pixel light count, so if I go to Edit, Project Settings, Quality, the pixel light count here, that only applies to forward rendering, which is an older style of rendering that's compatible with more graphics cards, and that has the limit on how many lights can illuminate a single pixel. So what I did was that I switched my rendering setup to deferred rendering. It wasn't actually in deferred rendering for the beginning part of this tutorial. And the way you do that is if you go to Edit, Project Settings, Player, and then you see Rendering Path Deferred. So when you change that, it will change your entire rendering setup to use deferred rendering, which will let you use as many lights as you want, which as you can see, I've got quite a few here. I go to, as you see, I've got all these lights going on. And because I made the change to deferred rendering, I am able to do that. I just wanted to really quickly mention on how you can actually change in between the two different rendering paths, deferred or forward, as the two main ones. You can also, if I can find my camera, in the camera you can also change its rendering path to, by default it'll be use player settings, but you can change it to specifically only use forward, and you can see the change that makes, or specifically only use deferred. So I usually just keep it at the default use player settings, and then again project settings, player, use deferred as the rendering path. All right, on with the rest.